now. So does that image help to what we're going to be looking at today?
Ooh, archaeological excavation from the 50s, maybe, or 60s. It's in black and white.
Well, 50s, 60s. That sounds pretty good. We're going to be looking at the United States, and we're going to be looking at the mound builders. So we're going to be looking at the mound builders in the United States. Now, when we think about the mound builders, some people think of the great mounds in Mississippi, and they might think that, you know, these are sort of large earthy mounds with the remains of little villages and so on around them, which they'll probably be right. But the mound builders themselves, as a phenomenon, were the Native Americans in North America building extremely large mounds, not just in the old Confederate state of Mississippi, but going all the way up to Illinois, building mounds all the way up to Wisconsin and Michigan, and even mound building taking place in Florida. So the mound builders, it's more of a phenomenon than a sort of cultural group of people building mounds across the part of North America. Now, the dates associated with building these mounds is varied, and the bias associated with these mounds and how they're interpreted is excruciatingly difficult for me to read, because what we do find with North America is that the original people that live in North America, their descendants are still with us today, have suffered greatly. They've suffered great indignities. But still, many Americans would say that the history of North America began around the late 1600s. Then there's talk before that about the Mayflower and all these wonderful things, and nothing really happened in North America before Westerners got there, which is a very highly insulting analogy. Now, I have looked at, as part of my postgraduate diploma with Leicester University, I looked at how the history and the archaeology, the heritage, the interpretation, what Native American history and archaeology is all about. And much of it, even today, is just being bulldozed and being lost. And in many ways, shapes, or forms, the archaeology of the Native American peoples is not usually being excavated by people of Native American stock. So it's usually being excavated by Westerners. So not only is the true identity of North America being interpreted by the people who are trying to destroy it, it's something that still goes on today. So what you can say associated with this image, this is a site in Illinois, in the central part of North America, between the Confederate and the northern states, in sort of the west, the eastern central part of the United States. And this is post holes associated with buildings in a connection with a very, very large mound. And excavation work, you've got an earlier image, and you've got an image that we're looking at more or less very fresh today. And the thing that we need to do is look around and try and understand where we are, because if I mention Wisconsin or Michigan or Mississippi, you can only guess where these places are. And that great mound itself might be close to the Mississippi River, but it's actually found in the state of Illinois, which is there, where the cursor is. Lots of these mounds, and we'll start off with looking at the northern state of Wisconsin and Michigan on the border with Canada. And we're going to look at some mounds associated with Wisconsin and Michigan. And if anyone is a political watcher like myself, they will know that if they were watching the presidential elections a couple of months ago, they will know that the state of Wisconsin and Michigan played a very important role in the United States presidential elections. And in many ways, looking at Michigan and Wisconsin tells me everything about the American mindset. It seems that the American mindset is only about two colors of skin, white and black. It's not about the people who originally developed North America, the redskin people, which is an area and their history that is very much neglected. And we start off with this very problem. And when I'm doing little bits of research and when I'm looking things up, occasionally you come up with answers to questions and interpretations from that somebody's put together, and that's where we're going to look at now. So where we're going to go first to look at these mound builders of Mississippi. Now, the word mound builders of Mississippi associate not just with the state, as I've mentioned, but the Mississippi River that stretches, that divides the east and the west of the United States, all the way from Lake Superior, more or less, all the way from Canada, all the way through to the Gulf of Mexico, and the likes of New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Louisiana. So along that entire landscape, you get these great mounds. But what we do see with these great mounds is that they're actively being removed from the landscape, even as we speak today, to more or less erase a whole identity that is not taught in the United States schools today. It makes me so angry that you get white and black lives matter, but you don't get anyone taking any notice of the people that were responsible for the foundation of the United States of America. And the bias and everything still goes on today. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to look at a thing that I've managed to snip out from the internet. It's dated 2018, and it's entitled "Unbelievable Facts About the Mounds of North America." Unbelievable facts about the mounds of North America. So if I just quickly screen share what I'm looking at, you'll be able to understand what I'm seeing. So you can obviously see this now. Unbelievable facts about the mounds of North America. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting that we've got that date there, the 12th of December 2018. So this article is only two years old. Now, the words that are used in this article are replicated from newspaper cuttings, which were cut out 100 years ago. So, and the stranglehold in understanding. Now, this is really key. The American archaeologists know more about one single pyramid in Egypt than they do about the entire origins or the entire sort of development of their own native peoples in North America. And it's the mound builders. Some of those great mounds could be classed in parallel to the Great Pyramids of Giza, where I'd like to see the Great Pyramids of Giza completely blown up, and let's study the mounds of North America and actually get some real information, some real information about the planet. Well, I know that sounds a bit extreme, but the fact of the matter is, no artifacts have ever been found in the Great Pyramids at Giza, when in fact each individual mound that's been found in North America, tens of thousands of artifacts have been found, but usually bulldozed and destroyed. What do we know about the mound builders who lived in North America before it was settled by the Native Americans we know of today? Pretty much nothing. That's assuming that the Native Americans that we do find today didn't build those mounds, which I say that they did. The mound builders remain a mystery to archaeologists today. And with each passing year, their earth mounds continue to disappear into obscurity. They're being bulldozed. It's a bit like the equivalent of destroying a Stonehenge every single year. One or two national parks in North America, for example, Wisconsin and Michigan, associated with the Great Lakes. There are one or two national parks up there. There's the effigy mounds in Wisconsin. Now, the effigy mounds represent, you've seen them from aerial views and so on, those effigy mounds of snakes and serpents across the landscape, which we're not actually really doing today, right? That's for your own research. But these date back to maybe 300 years AD, 1,700 years ago, different depictions of animals and birds and even one or two humans. It is estimated that there were anywhere up to 20,000 figure mounds covering the state of Wisconsin. And that would have been 150 years ago. Now only 4,000 survive. So this is active destruction of the real history of North America. As much as the battlefields of Gettysburg may be important, and the battlefield of Fredericksburg and the siege at Atlanta might be important to the people of North America today. These were only very fleeting moments in time, whereas these mounds were created and had been within the landscape for nearly 2,000 years, and some of them even longer than that. And now they're just being actively removed. So when European settlers started to get to Wisconsin in massive numbers after about 150 years ago, they've been there well before that as well, and the mounds were destroyed to make way for homes and farm fields. Numerous prehistoric artifacts were undoubtedly lost during this time. And listen to the headlines from about 100 years ago about these mounds. They belonged to lowest type of man on continent. And there's another headline news about a mound in Nebraska there associated with a giant and whatever. But the headline news there these mounds belong to the lowest type of man on the continent. Now, people can get away with saying that about Native Americans. If they said that to somebody who was Afro-Caribbean origin, there would be deaths and protests. But it seems that the people who actually originally were from North America, you can say whatever you like about them and you can get away with it. You can destroy their monuments and you can destroy the past. The effigy mounds of Wisconsin, many people believe that the effigy mounds were burial grounds, but not all of the mounds contain bodies. While the effigy mounds may have marked off hunting grounds for North America's prehistoric people, the truth is that we are uncertain as to the true meanings behind these mounds. Now, this little article here isn't about Wisconsin or Michigan. It's describing the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois. Now, the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois, there's a mound there that is huge, and that mound that's there, that mound that is there over 100 meters in length. The Cahokia Mound in Illinois is a mound itself that is still there today, and it's described in postcards in this article and burnt clay and so on. And then it mentions something known as the Greenfield Mound, and we're back to Wisconsin, and we're back to looking at Greenfield Mound. This is Wisconsin. While the surviving effigy mound portray animals, birds, and reptiles, there is only one mound in the shape of a human. At one time, there may have been hundreds of human-shaped mounds in North America, but they have all been destroyed. The only human-shaped mound in the United States and Canada can be found at Man Mound Park in Wisconsin. It measures 214 feet in length and has only been designated as a National Historical Landmark. So lots of these monuments that we're talking about, if they are protected, have only been starting to be protected in this modern age. While this effigy mound is protected for the moment, many other effigies across Wisconsin are in danger of being lost forever. Land developers and landowners consider the effigies as a nuisance, and there has been talk of lessening the protections surrounding these archaeological treasures. Now, we can actually look at Detroit. Now, Detroit itself in Michigan tells us of the great destruction that's occurred to these monuments. Now, actually, in the heart of the industrial sort of modern day industrial belt of North America, where you've got the car factories and so on of Detroit, for those car factories to have been constructed in the first place, they have leveled these Native American mounds. They've leveled them. Only one of them exists in the heart of Detroit. One mound is said to have been 200 feet long and 300 feet wide. Well, actually, if we change that around, it should be 300 feet long and 200 wide. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that this mound itself once existed. It was known as the Great Mound of the River Rouge in Detroit. And now it no longer exists. It's been completely erased. In the past 100-odd years, it's been completely erased. Standing 200 feet in the height, not a massive height, but then again, this was a massive mound. And here we go, a mad stone found inside the mound. This is how they treat Native American history. A mad stone found while digging in an old Indian mound near Indian fields. A colored tenant of Judge Clay McKee's found a mad stone. The stone is now in the hands of Judge McKee and is considered quite a curiosity. So these whatever's been found in these mounds have just been sort of used as curiosities. And so as Europeans began moving into Michigan and Wisconsin, the Native Americans were crowded out, forced out. The ancient mounds of Detroit were dug up and looted. Inside the ancient mounds, they found pottery, axes, arrowheads, and of course the old bones of the mound builders. After the mounds were looted, Europeans flattened out the region for building homes and for farming. And the mounds were in the way of progress, and the ancient artifacts were claimed by individuals, and much was lost over time. One mound, and a mound known as the Dover Mound itself, in the village of Dover, which is also found in Michigan. They were excavating there, and they found some diamonds, and everyone went in there to start digging into the mounds to find those diamonds. And basically, what we do see rapidly, these mounds would be lost forever. The place I'd like to go to now is to look at a couple of images in connection with Detroit, and that's where we're going to go. So let's just see where we are now. So we've got to stop that, and we've got to look at this map here and stop sharing. We'll go on to bingo. So again, where are we? So there we are. We can see the map, the yellow box, Wisconsin, and we're into the green box of Detroit. And you know, it does bid the question that, you know, I'm crying out and saying about the destruction of the native North America. To be honest with you, I don't give a damn about slave plantations, and I certainly don't give a damn about plantations that have any bearing after the past 300 years. What I really care about is the history of North America before anyone got there from Europe and before anyone got there from Africa. That's what's important to me. It's a history and archaeology that's been completely neglected. But then again, what we saw 2 or 3 years ago was the active destruction of our own history north of Barry on the 5 Mile Lane, and nobody did anything about it. So, you know, these things are actually going on in our country as much as they're constantly going on in North America. Is it about progress, or is it about actively erasing our past? In many ways, I feel it's about actively erasing our past. There's talk that there's talk of this great mound in Illinois, and there's talk of possibly not giving this mound and other mounds the protection that they deserve, which is a great shame. Just give the protection to the likes of Williamsburg or something like that, and just ignore what was there beforehand. So what we're going to go to now is we're going to go to Detroit. And whoever's got their mic on in the background, turn it off. So we've got something known as the Great Spring Wells Mound. And what we've got is that's the Great Spring Wells earthwork. And that there is number F on this little map in front of us. Is the Great Mound of the River Rouge. The Great Mound of the River Rouge no longer exists. The Spring Wells earthwork does, but all these other mounds are also gone. They've been actively removed. But what we do know from work that's been undertaken there is that we've got evidence to say that people have been living in that landscape for 3,000 odd years, and they go into a period known as the early woodland period. They give a nice little chronology. So if we go on to that chronology, there you go. Very, very different from when we look at our history and archaeology in Britain. We think, well, the Mesolithic period. And I'm just gonna try and mute a few people because I'm getting a massive amount of feedback. Somebody's got their somebody's left their mic on in the background, so I'm just gonna try and see what the problem is there. Let's see who's. We're gonna mute a few people. So let's. I think it was Chris. Very naughty Chris. I'm back where I am now. So anyway, let's get back to where we were. So. You share, bingo, excellent. What are we seeing on the screen? We should be seeing a little, very interesting chronology.
Yeah.
This could be a chronology of North America somewhere, and it could be a chronology of another part of North America. The thing is when we look at the chronologies of existence, and that's a serpent mound, right? That's one of the mounds that we were talking about with Wisconsin. But this chronology, so we know, for example, that the chronology, the lithic stage sort of before 10,500 years BC. This is when they're sort of developing their lithics. Archaic period, 8,000 to 1,000 years BC. There's a very long period, very long chronological period where things are developing. And then you've got some overlapping periods there, the formative stage, and you've got the woodland period. So you've got this great sort of period where it's described as a woodland period, and lots of these mounds are developed in this sort of woodland period. And the one thing that must be said is that these people of North America are really developing their society. They're creating these massive mounds, and the reasons why these mounds might be created could be manifold. But what we do have is there is still enough around to sort of think that we've got enough to help us understand what's going on in regards to the mound building in North America. So if we go back a little bit again. So what we have, this is Detroit. This is the Detroit River, the Rouge River, and you've got lots of the plants, and you've got lots of the housing, and you've got something known as Fort Wayne. And when we look through the images, and this is referred to as the Great Spring Wells Mound. Well, that Great Spring Wells Mound is basically this mound here. Now, it said it's a great mound, but this mound itself, the one that we're actually looking at, is not the 300-foot long mound that, if we go back to the map, in Detroit, which is marked as F. Now, the one at F has been completely erased. It's gone. It's gone. In the past 120 odd years, it's been removed. It's completely been scraped off the planet. But with this mound they've actually excavated. This is one of the oldest burial sites in southeast Michigan at the Fort Wayne or Springwell's mound reflects the burial practices of the mound builder culture that inhabited this area over 900 years ago, or probably more actually. So they're building these mounds for varying different purposes. And what they do find associated with the lower layers of these mounds is this type of pottery. Now, when we looked at this pottery, I think the overriding view was, even though this pottery is over 1,000 years old, the overriding view that we were looking at, we were thinking this looks very prehistoric. This looks, if this was found in Britain, this would be probably classed as Neolithic or Mesolithic. It looks very old in shape or form, but this is naturally the type of pottery that they're finding associated with the lower layers of the mounds and the mounds themselves. What really are the mounds about? And that's exactly what we're going to look at. So I've got a little bit of information that I want us to look at. The developments of lots of this type of pottery from these sort of black and white images. And that's known as the Fort Wayne Mound birdstone. And you've got columella bead necklaces and all these little things. And those marbles are rather interesting, right? So we're going to lose our little marbles, right? And we don't want to go there. We want to go back to looking at this mound. We're gonna look at the archaeological excavation of this mound, if anything. So this mound itself, this prehistoric mound, the history of investigations in the Detroit area of Michigan. So scientific interest in the Detroit mound goes back over 200 years. Now, the very interesting thing is that in regards to the removal of these mounds, you know, these mounds are being actively removed. You know, they've been, but there are actually one or two still left, like the one we're actually looking at on the screen. Now, the interesting thing is that they've been excavating at these mounds. There was a chap in 1817, a chap by the name of Samuel Brown. And he excavated at one of the 3 mounds at Springwell Mound Group. There's a group of mounds, as you can see on the map, within that area. And he was excavating there in 1817. And it said that in the 1817 excavations, that he was recovering bones, stone axes, arrowheads, and other artifacts. And I'm thinking that's really, really important, and it's really interesting that you've got somebody sort of semi-scientifically recording one of these mounds, and they're excavating and they're recording things. And what's interesting to me is that somebody has gone out their way and they said, right, these mounds actually mean something. One of the great excavators of these mounds not so long before was actually Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson was involved in, he was one of those who was doing early excavation work. And again, Thomas Jefferson was excavating at these type of mounds. And what is interesting is that somebody was going out their way and actually saying, actually, there was a history in North America before people actually got here on the Mayflower. People actually, there was, before the American War of Independence, there was actually something more important than the forts that we've got around us. There was something more important than Williamsburg. Somebody was excavating these sites. And again, there was more excavations on these sites in Detroit in 1837, where not only were they finding grave goods, and they were finding pottery, and they were finding charcoal, and they were finding arrowheads and stone knives and marine shells and shell beads and pigment and all these things. It's rather interesting that somebody is actually writing this information down. But by 1887, some of these mounds are actually being destroyed because the new development work, gravel extraction, but somebody is going out their way and writing some of the information down. Now, the mound that we're actually talking about, the one in front of us in 1876, this was being excavated using sort of modern scientific techniques at that point. Said that the mound itself 5 feet above ground level, and it's 70 feet in diameter, which is described in the one in front of us. So they were excavating that site, and they were actually the thing is, when you've got the trail of tears, and you've got the you're already looking at the thankful massacre of General Custer at the Battle of Bighorn, and you've got the sad movement of Native Americans around North America. You've got this at the same time. All that's going on is people are excavating these mounds, and they're saying, actually, you know, there's stuff in them, and the stuff in them is actually relevant. And I think that is really important, because there are people up there who are actually saying, you know, there is stuff here, there is stuff going on. You know, there's important things going on before all of that we talk about that's important, like the historical stuff. There's a lot more going on in these mounds. Interesting enough, in 1944, one of the mounds that's part of the fort at Fort Wayne, they excavate another one of the mounds, and they find all sort of little bits of bobs, from chipstone through to lithic flakes to sort of hammerstone, adzes, awls, shells. And interesting enough, as they're excavating these mounds, they actually start to find modern stuff as well, because what's happened is that by 1944, when they're excavating some of these mounds, they've actually found out that the people have actually been there before, and people have actually had a little bit of a dig, and they've taken things away and whatever. So as they're excavating these mounds, they actually find another chronology. So they don't find a Native American chronology, they actually find a modern chronology where people have excavated there and left their clay pipes behind. They've actually found little children's playing marbles in the mounds that are fairly modern. So indicating that people have been very curious about these mounds for a very, very long period of time. Now, with the mound in front of us again, as they were excavating, they found various interesting things, like the bones of deer and raccoon and muskrat and turtle and fish and clam, and the remains of a dog being buried. And they either think that this is ceremonial, or these are just things that have been discarded in the past by the people who were responsible for building these mounds. So what we do have is lots of pottery that you've seen, and if I sort of some of the designs are quite interesting in that. If I show you this now, so if we go with this in front of me, so what we do find is that the mound that you're actually looking at, they were excavating, and they found this type of pottery. And again, it's all handmade. None of it's been made on the wheel. Some of this is 1,000 years old, 1,000, 300, 400 years old, or whatever. It's the period known as the Woodland period, which is that chronological period associated with North America. And again, you're looking at this pottery, and it looks very basic. It looks the type of stuff that we would have had in our Neolithic period, but that's not to detract away from the fact that we've got the people building these mounds. They've got pottery. They're going into a ceramic period, whether it's 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, or much longer. And again, this is material evidence that people are in North America, and are constructing these mounds, and these are very important time signs of what's going on in North America. I've just been brought a cup of tea. Thanks for the tea, Michelle. So one thing I wanted to bring with you is a sort of idea of some of the types of things that you might actually find in these mounds. But these mounds are the mounds associated with Michigan and the likes of Wisconsin in North America. And it's likely that the mounds that they're looking at, the chronology roughly, they're saying that the chronology of these mounds might take the mounds back to maybe 750 years AD, which is a radiocarbon date, and that the mounds are really being constructed by around 1,000 years ago, and then probably by around 1250, the mounds are completely abandoned. Lots of these mounds are abandoned. And then there's a big gap of time that you then see the first Europeans are going to North America. In some places, the mounds have been there for hundreds of years before Europeans get there and been abandoned. Some mounds are being constructed right up until the point that the Europeans get there. But the main thing is these mounds are very important time signs to understand the people that once dominated the landscape of North America. And what I would like to do now is, as we start to look at these again, and again, more of this pottery, which we've already seen, and some nice bit of a rim there with a nice bit of design, sort of a cord design. The designs on it actually come from rope, from cord, so which they impress on the pot to give it a design, and one of the types of arrowheads. Now, something I want to say about this arrowhead. The one thing that is very difficult to date is arrowheads in North America, and the reason why arrowheads are really difficult to date in North America is because they were Native Americans were being used by the Confederate and Union armies in the American Civil War between 1860, December 1860, and then you looking at into April and May 1865, and arrows, and they're actually using arrows. So what's happening is that you see the reason why Native Americans are being used is that they can take out enemy commanders without anyone hearing a shot. So they can climb into a tree, and the bow and arrow could be lined up, and a Union or Confederate commander could be killed by a Native American, and nobody knows where the arrows come from because nobody's fired off a musket. And the point being is that what we do see is that the chert, the chalcedony, the low levels of flint that are being used, and the obsidian arrowheads. This would have been an obsidian arrowhead probably. And these are actually being found on battlefields and sites across North America from varying different periods. So they're very, very difficult artifacts to date to give you a material idea of what's going on. So flints, the same shape being used for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 4,000 years, being used in American War of Independence, the American Civil War. So these types of artifacts are really difficult to date. And I've just mentioned this is the bird stone found at the Fort Wayne Mound, a really unusual stone object from one of the mounds excavated in 1944, columella bead necklaces. So, and those marbles, the legendary marbles. So you can imagine somebody's excavating there, and they're thinking they're excavating in a mound that was last disturbed, or last there was a last internment, or last bit of earth was chucked on there 1,000 years ago, and they're excavating away, and they're finding bits of clay pipe, and they're finding little bits of marble from which had been left there by people that had excavated those mounds earlier. And this is what we see in archaeology. Lots of mounds have been dug into and violated or whatever over the years, and that's sort of the evidence for it. So what I'd probably like to do now is give you a little bit more information. And this itself is a Cahokia mound in Illinois, and lots of these other mounds spread across the landscape. The Cahokia mound as well, the Mississippian cultural platform mounds. So we'll go on to that in a moment, actually. But one thing, if we want to use the word Mississippi, and I've already said that they're known as the Mississippian mounds because they're built alongside the Mississippi River. But there's a lot of mounds actually in the old Confederate state of Mississippi. And all the little sort of yellow triangles there sort of indicate some localities where some of these mounds are. Bear Creek Mound, for example, up there near the Tennessee border, and Winterville Mound there, and the Emerald Mound, the Grand Village Mounds, and so on. So this is actually in Mississippi. And when you're sort of doing the research for this, when I was doing the research for us, you look at Mississippi mound builders and you go to Wisconsin and you think, well, something not quite right there. And then you look at Illinois, and then eventually you get to the mounds, the Mississippian mounds. There's actually alongside the Mississippi River in the old state of Mississippi itself. So with my other little notes here, the mound builders, the vast terrain stretching from the Great Lakes, the Gulf of Mexico, and from the Mississippi Valley, the Atlantic seaboard is dotted with thousands of ancient man-made earthen and shell mounds and embankments. More than 5,000 mounds have been recorded outside the Mississippi Valley. Now, we've already said there was probably about 20,000 sort of across Wisconsin and Michigan. So, you know, there's a lot more than meets the eye. Some mounds are taller than oaks, while others are barely waist high. There are dome mounds, there are cone mounds, flat-topped platforms, other geometric forms and animal effigies, as well as raised rings, spans and facades. Many were built in a single stage, but larger mounds were often capped or mantled several times. Some mounds are devoid of artifacts. There's nothing in them. There's nothing in them. And there's no interior features. There's no sort of lost tomb of the pharaoh in them or anything like that. While others cover dismantled wooden buildings, wooden henges, for example, or the equivalent wooden henges. And still others contain burials or form foundations for wall buildings. Embankments in circle plazas or connected buildings in cosmic or magical arrangements. Play on words there. Sometimes there is only one mound, sometimes there are a score or more. Invested labor ranges from modest, a few people working for a few days, and then to monumental that people have toiled for decades to create these huge mounds for whatever reasons, for whatever purposes. And at the beginning, I mentioned about mentioning these mounds as mounds that we've got a reason for, or were built by one group of people. It's just many reasons, many reasons. So maybe I'll just change the image. I've got a nice little bit of information, you know, and then what we'll do, we'll go on to the break actually. So that would be a good point. So you're looking wow, and you're thinking sort of move on a little bit further. And these types of mounds, we'll come on to all these, looking at this sort of perspective, this vista, and that's a nice one. That's exactly the same one we've just seen, but it just gives a little bit more greatness to this sort of image. And as I sort of read on a little bit more, actually. So who built these mounds? I mentioned, I've asked who built them. What are they about? One of the writers earlier on said that they were pre-Native American people. I say that they were built by Native Americans, and so on and so on. But the main thing is, it's like many things in history and archaeology. We can't always give answers. We could argue that we are descendant from builders who built Stonehenge, or we are inevitably all linked to the princes and kings of the old Cymru, or some of us are direct descendants from King Arthur, or whatever. Right? I think that's a very distracting thing. You know, who built these mounds? The main thing is that they were constructed. They were there. So, but back to this question, who built these mounds? Ignoring more than a century of eyewitness accounts, some antiquarians from the 1800s refused to admit that the mounds were the work of the American natives, or as they called them, the Indians, claiming instead that the architects were refugees from sunken continents, lost races, conquered, or they were ex-Aztecs, or they'd been moved out by the Aztecs or the Toltecs, or these mound builders were the people of the old continent of Atlantis and Von Daniken and Chariots of God, and let's put a few aliens in there, and actually let's just chuck it all in there, right? These were definitely not constructed by the native peoples of America, but they were. They were. I think maybe some of the antiquarians that we've mentioned in when excavating at Detroit, some of those little descriptions that we had earlier on, they believed in what they were doing. They believed that these mounds were a perspective of North America, but then there were other people that said that they were not to do with the people of North America. What the Smithsonian Institute has done now is showed that people of Native American stock from North America built these mounds. That's what we know now. But this hasn't truly resolved who the mound builders were. What it does say is that the people who were constructing these mounds were dynamic. They had a different direction. They had a different understanding. They had a different approach, like the same approach that we looked at when we were looking at in regards to the people of the Amazon basin. You could look at the archaeology there basin. You could think, well, how could these rampant savages build anything in the Amazon basin, and how could they have built whole plazas and towns and cities? And you could be really biased and you could be really racist. And then you could take my approach and say, well, what is civilization? Is civilization building great cities, or is civilization living in a small community in a tropical rainforest, being able to survive self-sufficiently forever? That to me is civilization. So it really depends how people, in what direction they go in, and then whatever direction they go in the history, whether they create mounds and then abandon mounds and then they do something else and they create mounds again, which is probably the story that we're looking at. We've got no right to judge any of this. The main thing is these people actually built these mounds. So boosted by radiocarbon dating from the 1950s, archaeologists have traced mound builder roots back at least 6,000 years. So when I was doing this on Monday, one of the things I actually struggled with was most of my stuff was saying that these mounds were being constructed about 1,000 years ago, and then some were saying it actually been constructed a little bit before that. And then we actually look at other experts and they say, actually, these mounds have been built for 6,000 years, which is a long time. And actually, interestingly enough, if you think about the way these mounds are being constructed over time, you could actually put these up against a parallel, a border associated with the construction of the Great Pyramids at Giza. So if we look about 6,000 years, the Great Pyramids of Giza were being constructed around 4,000. Start again. Yeah, that's right. About 4,600 years ago. So these people were building mounds before, if not contemporary, with the construction of the Great Pyramids of Egypt. So the oldest known mound group that we do see is a place at Montesano, sounds similar. Montesano in Louisiana. So that's just south of the state of Mississippi. And what they've seen there whilst they've excavated is like two conical shaped mounds covering a cremation area. And they believe that the dates for that actually don't take the earliest evidence of mound building in North America to 6,000 years ago. It doesn't even take it to 7,000 years ago. Actually takes it to just under 7,500 years ago that we actually see mounds first being constructed in Louisiana. So going a lot further than 1,000 years ago, really. So a lot further beyond the mounds at Detroit, and lot further than some of the mounds in Mississippi. So what we do see is lots more elaborate mounds being built in the Mississippi Valley 6,000 years ago. So solitary mounds, and then you've got a mound complexes between 2 and 11 structures, 11 mounds, maybe one mound or several mounds. Early mounds were empty, but were occasionally built over demolished wooden structures. So you're thinking they're building these mounds and there's nothing in them. Does that sound idiotic? Well, actually, it don't sound idiotic at all, actually, because I think if we want to do a little bit of comparison here, it doesn't sound idiotic to me, actually. I'm just pondering this question. When we look at Silbury Hill, the Duke of Marlborough, when he was excavating at Silbury Hill in the, I think it's 1780s or somewhere like that, the Silbury Hill, when he's excavating, he doesn't really find anything in it. He thinks that in the middle of Silbury Hill, just south of Avebury, and he reckons that there's going to be a burial. There's going to be a burial in the middle. He doesn't find anything. He finds some bits and pieces. He doesn't actually find a burial, and he's really disappointed. But then again, why do mounds need to have anything in them? Why does all these mounds? Why do all these things need to have a golden room with a key that opens it and some artifacts in there? Don't really need to have that. So if you put this to these mounds in Mississippi and you look at these and you start to think, well, it doesn't necessarily need to have anything in them. Now, when we look at Louisiana, about just over 3,500 years ago, there's a mound in Louisiana, a giant earthwork incorporating nearly 1 million cubic yards of dirt, erected at a place known as Poverty Point in Louisiana. So that's 1 million cubic yards of dirt. 1 million cubic yards of dirt. That's a lot of dirt. And then what we do see, this is what's interesting. People build these mounds, and a place in Poverty Point in Louisiana, which we're not really going to visit, just to sell a little bit of information here. So this is over 3,500 years ago, 3,700 years ago to be precise. They abandoned the site. They abandoned the site. They built it. Everyone moved away, and then 600 years later, people move in and they build other mounds. And then a few hundred years later, around the turn of the Christian era, they often became lavishly appointed conical tombs that incorporated homespun mortuaries. So they actually move into being mortuaries. So things with these mounds change. You know, there's always these constant changing things. So again, what we do see from Mississippi all the way into Alabama to Illinois to Arkansas to Louisiana and so on, they're starting to build these mounds all over the place. What they're about, and there's some talk in these different areas across these various states. Some of them could be classed as temples. Some of them are burial mounds. Some are flat-topped pyramids with nothing on them. There's some mounds and there's loads of mounds and there's big mounds. You know, these mounds have different meanings wherever they go. So that they're not just in one or two areas, but there could be something more practical. There could be something more practical with these mounds. And when I was looking at this at Monday, I started to think, well, they're associated with the Mississippi River. What do I know about the Mississippi River? What do I know about the Sumerian civilization? What do I know about the Indus Valley people? What do I know about ancient Egypt? What do I know about these places? I know enough to say that lots of these areas are in floodplains. So for example, when we looked at the Indus Valley, we looked at little miniature walls within the towns and sort of temples and sort of being able to deal with flooding and then we look at ancient Egypt. We know in ancient Egypt that the flooding of the River Nile and water management is massively important. And we can look at the people of Samaria, and we can think of the Tigris and the Euphrates, and we start to think, well, these mounds are very much associated with the Mississippi, and it could be that it could be to do with the fact that in some places these mounds are to actually keep people safe when the Mississippi River floods. So the location was a fortunate one for the mound builders, with fertile delta soils and wetlands supporting food supplies, primeval hardwood forests providing resources for shelter, streams and rivers containing fish and shellfish, natural levees from the Mississippi River, sandy and silty loams protecting the site from flooding. So all of this is there's a flood link. The Mississippi, these great mounds. There's something to do with fish and so on and so on. So again, I wish I had a map in front of us, but I'm just trying to give an overview more than anything, and then we look at a few more images, and we look at the KARL-JAMES mound itself after the break. And anyway, back to there's a site known as Winterville. This wonderful site known as Winterville. The Winterville site near the present city of Greenville has at least 23 mounds and several plazas. So you've got these mounds and you've got these open square areas. Like other Mississippian societies, the people of Winterville had a well-defined social hierarchy based on hereditary through the female line. I knew the women would come into it eventually, and expressed at the top through affiliation with a powerful chief. A fire in the late 1300s destroyed the original structure at Winterville, and the population declined thereafter, moving to other locations. The powerful Nazca tribe were among the last of the mound builders, but its unity was destroyed in a prolonged war with the French in 1731. So what can we learn from that date? They were still building mounds in 1731 until the damnable Spanish, the French, and the damnable English got there to destroy the way of life that these people had held very firm for thousands of years. The mound builders, and it's sort of in concluding with this sort of this bit now before we have the break. I've probably gone way over where I should have gone today, but the mound builders were not a single tribe, but comprised many independent groups that built mounds as a traditional way of celebrating the creation and the cosmos. Natives called mounds navels, the mini mountains where first humans rose from their watery birth cave in the earth. See, water there, Mississippi, great. And many of the multiple mound complexes, especially the older ones, employ standard measurements and mound placement to portray the cyclical march of the sun, moon, and Venus across the sky. Love it. All these different reasons. Mound arrangements thus not only diagram the tiered cosmos, but accurately measure the day counts of the heavenly cycles. So now we're talking about meanings like Stonehenge. They are native North America's first calendar, predating similar Mesoamerican almanacs by centuries. So did these mounds have a lot more than just mounds in where there's nothing in them? I would say so, and I will just tell you a little bit about that in a moment, and we'll have a break. Mound form and use changed over the 7,000+ years of the history of the mound building. The mound builders remained true to the ancient core beliefs until a last basket load of earth was tamped into place. So in other words, basically, until the last basket load of earth is tamped into place, will we still continue to see mounds constructed. Now, if we go to this image again, this wonderful massive mound, Cahokia Mound in Illinois, we look at this and we think, wow, there's a lot of soil in there. There's more than a couple of bucket loads in that mound. And actually, you know, we last night, no, it wasn't last night. It was yesterday afternoon. I was doing a one-to-one class with Rosamond, and what we do in our one-to-one classes, we've got a load of old images that I've got on the computer, and we put it into a lecture. And we were looking at one thing. That the thing was that we were looking at mounds in a prehistoric context, and I was saying that these mounds don't need to have anything in them to have meaning. For example, a mound might be a place where the ancestors go. What we do see in Britain is we do see lots of mounds and there's nothing in them. There's a phenomenon known as the bank barrows. Not the long barrow, the bank barrow. And in a bank barrow is just like a long, tender, slender sausage going across the landscape. And it's just a mound of earth. And it starts here and it ends there 100 meters away. There's nothing in it, right? And it's just that concept that in life there are three certainties. There is life, there is death, and there are ancestors, where you go to after you die. And that's what these mounds might represent, where people might go to after they die. But the very principle of the mound has a lot more meaning than just a big pile of earth. It's a way of looking at things, and it's a way of having a sense of perspective. So before we go on to our break, just if anyone is interested in the Zoom stuff next week, let me know. Again, joining Jessica for next Thursday. I'll be doing the last Thursday tonight, where we'll be looking at landscape archaeology. And next week, what are we doing next week? That's that is actually in my diary, so I will tell you now. And then we'll have a break. So we will just oh yeah, next week is a very unusual one. It's looking at Glastonbury actually, and I don't know why that's in there, but there's a reason for it. So what we're going to do, if anyone wants any questions about anything that we'll be doing over the next few weeks, ask them now. But so I'd like to ask Goff, is there anything you'd like to say?
No, it's great that you've gone to North America again. It was very interesting. So, thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I just wanted to do something that is just not on the radar, which I'm doing. Thank you. Keith.
These were presumably settled farming communities at that stage. You know, they didn't have the horse, did they? So they were just settled farming communities building these mounds.
Right now, that's the problem. They did have the horse, but that's another class. But let's leave the horse out of it. Let's just put it over there. It just complicates things. So yeah, the agricultural society, yeah, sort of sedentary agricultural society. They've got their pottery, they've got their settlement, and it's just these are very different people than for example the people of the Last of the Mohican, if you know what I'm talking about. These are very different than the Apache Indian or Navajo. You know, this is a very different type of North America.
Different culture type.
But it's not just one culture. It's dozens of different people spread over such a large area. So you're talking from the Gulf all the way to the Great Lakes, and they spread. The boundaries could probably are going to be the 4 states, yards to Nevada. That's sort of how it is. And then these mounds just toss all the way over to the eastern seaboard. So it's quite a large area, and it's believed that over a third of North America has these mounds, except it did have until people started to. So
okay.
Right, let's open the mics. I do believe Chris's daughter's arrived.
No, she's been and gone.
All right, fair enough.
No, she's been and gone. She came. I missed the beginning of the lecture, I'm afraid. But is there any evidence? You said it went up to Lake Superior. Is there any evidence of mound building in Canada?
Probably yes.
Yeah.
And why not? Because there weren't any borders back then, so why not? Exactly. What about you, Chrissy M?
The material for the mounds, is that presumably just scraped up from the surrounding area?
That's just mud. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, there's no equivalent big hole somewhere where they dug it all out of.
Well, if you want to do a comparison with Silbury Hill, what we do find with Silbury Hill is that the soil to create Silbury Hill actually comes from a quarry immediately around it. So the subsidence for Silbury Hill in Wiltshire is actually continuous, but these mounds themselves vary in where the material comes from, and if it's done over a long period of time and people move in soil in, and obviously they're still there today, so it's likely that they're quite stable structures, as we will see from an illustration that I'll come on to. Jane?
Not really, no. I'm very, that one that you've got up now is very impressive size, isn't it?
It is a very impressive size, and we're going to be looking at that one after the break as well, the Cahokia Mound itself in Illinois, and you're thinking, well, Illinois, that's not even in the south, but it's alongside the Mississippi River. So this is, you know, I can vaguely remember reading something years ago. I was like, the mound builders of Louisiana, and I'm thinking, why? Okay, the mound builders of Mississippi. Wow. And then actually it's the mound builders of the Mississippi, because it's these states all the way alongside the Mississippi that has these mounds. So So what about you, Pamela, because obviously we don't have today Kathy and Jim and Karen. Well, I'm glad we don't have the witch Kathy, because who wants her around anyway? Do you know what I mean? Pam?
I don't know anything about the mounds, but I have seen Silbury Hill, and they did say at one time that there was nothing in it, and then in recent years they have said no, there is something there.
What was
and
that
they
again?
won't say what. That I know what you said years ago. There was nothing in it, but in recent years, it'll be the last 2 or 3 years, they have said no, there is something there, but they won't say what at the moment.
Oh, one of those, you see, one of those great big mysteries.
And that's by archaeological group. They said we can't say because, and they won't say. So
Do you know what I think's in there?
but I'd love to know.
Elvis.
Go on.
Elvis. Well, actually, I think that's a good bet. Actually, Elvis. Yeah. So.
If you find out, yeah, it'd be good, wouldn't it?
No, if I find out, I've got to kill you.
You're probably right.
So I don't want to kill you, and if I do kill you, then it's not going to be good. Right.
So, Carl, is it possible that the mounds are there as a sort of for the floods to just sort of,
as I said, I said that myself. You know, it's that direct relationship with water, soil, life. Yeah, water. Mississippi. It happens to be along the Mississippi, and also the other thing as well is talking about construction of these mounds. It could be that every time the Mississippi flooded, the excess alluvium was used to build the mounds. So it was just piled up. So that that's what they did that's what they do in ancient Egypt.
Perhaps they were just tidying up the landscape.
Maybe they were. The fact that in one or two cases, maybe exactly. But when you think about the great flood of the Nile every year, that soil is the soil itself. It's not just the water. It's the soil that's created from the flooding of the River Nile, and that itself is an interpretation. And then the flooding of the Mississippi with the rich, everything that comes up from it has also got a meaning. So
could it also, are they all close to the Mississippi? So I'm thinking maybe the Mississippi had been blocked by soil and then they moved it over.
They're quite spread out, actually. They're quite spread out from the Mississippi, but they're associated with the Mississippi. Yeah. I got to take a break now. So
okay, coffee break.
Coffee break, yes.
Have you had someone filling a bath in your background, by the way, Carl?
Have I had someone filling a bath?
Like water. Yeah, there's a noise like water filling something.
Have we got water filling? No, we haven't got any water. No.
That's weird. Something going on somewhere. Never mind. Okay, coffee break.
Coffee break. Right. So, I think the one question was about Canada, and what I've got in front of me is, if I share my screen, sharing screen now. Now, I looked at. I don't know if you can see this. There's one that says Serpent Mounds Park National.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, that is basically in regards to Canada. So there's a Serpent Mound Park in Canada, and this Serpent Mounds Park is also home to the Sacred Serpent Mounds, an Aboriginal historic site with evidence of occupation spanning 2,000 years. And this is basically, this was protected as of 2002 in Canada. So the answer to the question, yes, these monuments do exist in Canada, right? The other, this is something that came up as well. This is dated to the 22nd of the 12th from the Cincinnati Enquirer. This demonstrates what I've been saying. Christian prayer group and Native Americans face off at Ohio's Serpent Mound. So in other words, deputies were called Sunday, so there's only a few weeks ago, when a Christian prayer group and Native Americans faced off at the Great Serpent Mound, the Native American National Historic Site in southern Ohio. And the point being made is that it's almost as if the rights of these Native Americans are completely ignored in the face of some of these Christian prayer groups. And it still goes on. It's almost as if, you know, this is a Christian country. We were here before the Native Americans, and what right do the Native Americans have to stop us going to this great mound in Ohio? Now, that was something extra. And then I mentioned about the Great Serpent Mound again in Ohio. And again, this is on the border between Canada and the United States. That's the one we just mentioned, the Serpent Mound, and they're talking about that maybe going back as far as 3,000 years ago. So Serpent Mound. So these mounds are relatively in lots of states of the United States of America. So what I'd like to do now is stop that sharing. It's just a few sort of questions to our answers to questions. So what we now have is this image and share screen. And I know some of you were talking about the terrible virus before the break. This is the second time I've had this virus. And yes, so I've just got to just trying to say that you have it once and you keep getting it and all these different things. So just to sort of cheer you up. Anyway, so we're going to look at the Cahokia Mound, which is actually in Illinois. Now, those that don't know where Illinois is, it's north of Mississippi and Tennessee. And if we go back to the little plan, which I should have actually, there we go. So there is Illinois. There it is, Illinois, and we've just mentioned about Ohio, which we've just been. So so we've looked at Wisconsin along the lakes, and we've looked at Michigan, and we've looked at Illinois, and there's Ohio, the Great Serpent Mound that I mentioned. And somebody mentioned it, we mentioned earlier on, how far are these away from the Mississippi River? Well, actually, Ohio is quite some distance, is actually 300 miles east of the Mississippi River. So lots of these sites may actually be way out of the Mississippi Delta landscape, but actually associated with the lake there and the border with Canada and so on. Anyway, moving back to where we want to be, the Cahokia Mound. And so there we go. And I would like to sort of introduce this, and we've got other mounds represented here. It's not the Cahokia site. This Cahokia site. This little plan in front of us. So it's basically this little plan here is saying, look, we've got a cross section of a mound, and those mounds on the left and the mounds on the right are sort of within this landscape. And it's basically saying, look, what we've got these post holes associated with some kind of ceremonial site or something else, and then you've got a mound built directly on top of that. Maybe the post holes were responsible in keeping the earth above it, and then you've got another mound above that, and you've got another mound above that, and another mound above that, and you've got a temple structure, and you've got steps leading up to it. And then later on, you've got some kind of burial that's actually built within the platform. Now, I said that we don't really have a model. We don't really understand these mounds, and we can't really say that they were all used for ceremony, which they weren't. We can't say that they were all used for habitation, which they weren't. We can't say that they were all used for burial, which they weren't. They were used for different purposes, different facets of little bits, little communities based around the landscape. So one community might have one mound, another community up the road, completely separate, might have 3 or 4 mounds. 100 miles away, there might be something else. So these stretched over basically 1,000 miles. So for different reasons and over different periods. So a little bit of so this is where we are now, Illinois. And this is saying the Monk's Mound, which is that big mound that we've mentioned. Jane's saying how impressive that mound looked. And again, this great mound, and what we've got there's a lot going on in this reconstruction. And what's going on in this reconstruction? There's houses, there's these big structures, the Monk's Mound, the one that we've been looking at, and there's these other structures, and there's a bit of a wall around it, and there's loads of little houses, and there's agriculture, and there's streams leading all the way down to the Mississippi, and there's lakes, and there's fishing, and so on and so on, and there's maize, and there's trade, and there's lots going on. And this itself is quite a civilized world. And you've got totem poles standing up there as well. So I'm just going to get to my notes, and because I've put more stuff into it than I needed to today. So here we go. So the site, to give you an idea of the Cahokia site, and where that is, the site that we've been looking at now, you know, with the big mounds and the one in front of us, that's been extensively excavated. That's been extensively analysed. And I've got a nice little article in here. The Mississippians were the mound builders in North America. And this article dates that to 2019, so it's probably as good as you're going to get. So we have said that these mounds have been built over a long period of time, 7,000 years to be precise. But lots of the evidence that we've been looking at, the evidence that you're seeing in front of us from the Cahokia site in Illinois itself, the Mississippian culture, you could call it, classed as a pre-Columbian horticulturalist site, sort of going after their woodland period. We mentioned their woodland period. They've got different periods than us. We've got the medieval, they've got the woodland period. And what we do find is, if you want to put a little bit of a chronology into this, so a really sensible chronology, right? Looking at what you're looking at, right? Looking at what you're looking at was probably abandoned sometime around 1450, right? And maybe it might have been reoccupied for a little time, but by about 1450, that site that you're looking at in Illinois was abandoned. And it was starting to be developed a long time before. By around 1000 years AD, they're really starting to chuck these mounds up, and they're starting to have a bit of intensification with their maize exploitation and so on. So roughly around 800 to about 1050, you've got the villages, you've got intensification of agriculture, you've probably got the very early origins of constructing these mounds. And the massive surprising thing is, the hugely surprising thing about all this is that at this one site, the site that you're looking at in front of you, where you've got the reconstruction there, near the Mississippi, near that meandering river that leads to the Mississippi, with all the little lakes, with all the maize fields and so on, it's likely by around 900 years ago, by around the 1100s, Cahokia may have had a population of 20,000 people. Now, that may not sound a lot, but 20,000 people, coordinators, organized at just that one site, tells us two things. It tells us that civilization was working, and to have a population supported, which is up to 20,000 people in the middle of nowhere, right? You want to say it like that way, in the middle of nowhere alongside the Mississippi, where nothing's really going on. 20,000 people, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on at just that one site, and there are a number of these sites. And then what you've got is that it's again likely that the Cahokia model is being repeated all over the place. But for some reason, whatever reason it was, by 1450, what the hell was that?
Who was
Sorry,
that?
that was my phone.
We always thought you were cuckoo.
Well, that just come as a surprise then. I gotta be honest with you. By 1450, for whatever reason, they start to abandon these sites. Now we see it all over the place. We see it with South America. Actually, that's a really interesting with the Amazon basin. We start to see the landscape being abandoned. You know, these great cities that we were talking about with South America, we start to see them abandoned. long after this, we're talking about 100 years in, under 100 years in, we're starting to see the Aztec, and the Aztec world starting to collapse, and obviously that's part mainly to do with the conquistadors. And by around 1539, the site may have been completely abandoned, or there may have been a couple of people living there, but by 1539, this is where the interesting thing comes in. 1539, that there's a Spanish explorer called Hernando de Soto. De Soto's expedition into the Mississippi, and it's either that lots of these sites have been destroyed by that point, or any surviving populations at these sites would have been dramatically injured by the diseases that the Spanish were actually bringing in under Hernando de Soto. But we've already mentioned that in some places they're still building these mounds into the 1700s. So the sites are not completely abandoned. But this mega site that you've got, the mega mound that so impresses Jane, Cahokia, and so impresses me, Cahokia site is really much abandoned. And we got to try and think why. We got to think what's going on. But what I have tried to demonstrate today is that these people, the Mississippi people, the people building these mounds, the Mississippian mound builders are loosely spread across the landscape into sort of independent chieftains, independent tribes, and there's a trade system, and there must have been a trade system. There may have been a system based on warfare, but there's one interesting fact, one very intriguing, interesting fact, and I mentioned it. I've only briefly mentioned it. But when they started excavating not the Illinois mound, but some of the mounds in the south, in the Mississippi and Louisiana, when they've started excavate them and get a little bit more detail, the ones that contain burials, they've actually found that there's a predominance of female burials. It's almost as if the society's dominated, not by the paternal guidelines of society, but maternal guidelines of society. That the landscape is dominated by the female, rank and file of society. This is a female-dominated society, from what we can glean from the burials. So that's one thing that they've been finding. So it's a very different society. So when we mention warfare, is if women are not prone to be fighting all the time like men are. So if it's a female-dominated society, and it probably would be less warlike, very much based on fertility and agriculture and so on, rather than warfare. So this site itself, this Cahokia site, the largest. This is the place. This is the Giza pyramids of the Mississippian mound building world. The Cahokia site is arguably the main generator for the ideas of these people. It's the bottom dollar. It's where you go to. That this is sometime in about the 1200s, 1250, where you've got this great world of all these mounds, all these sort of independent and sometimes interdependent states from the Gulf all the way up to Canada, spread out. But mounds have been with them for quite some time. But it's at that stage there's a huge explosion, and then there's a huge decline. We see this. There's a huge decline. We think we know why there's a huge decline in the Mississippian people. We think we know what's going on in the Amazon. We think we know what's going on at Pablo Bonito. It's almost as if sometime in the late 1300s, the 1400s, civilizations in the Americas starts to collapse, and it's not because of the Westerner. It's not because of the likes of the Spaniard. That's not the reason. Things start to decline. Cahokia's extraordinary size and early development. It's said by some major archaeologists in North America say that the Cahokia site is the site that sort of set the mark. And it might be that this is sort of setting the mark for people to think, hang on a minute, they've got a big mound over there, so we can do it. But again, keep saying these mounds had already existed in the past, but now around 1100 years AD, to about 1450, building mounds is now a big thing again. And maybe building mounds would have become a big thing again in the future. So what some people try to do, they try to link in all these mounds together. They like to say, you know, that these mounds may be associated with some kind of trade. It might be the Mississippi that's sort of the roadway to move trade and to have people working together. Because at lots of sites they see the predominance of trading items like whelks and shell cups and marine shells that are being traded, and so they see this across a large number of these sites. So I've mentioned about something about social organization. Now, the social organization associated with these mounds across this landscape, the Cahokia site going all the way up to Wisconsin, going all the way to Mississippi, going all the way over to Ohio, and so on, across the whole landscape. How the landscape was divided, it would have been based on these various communities having some kind of centralized organization. Ruled over by a small leadership. This small leadership may have controlled the likes of food storage, organized the labor to build the platforms in the first place. There was obviously organization to develop craft product production in regards to copper and shells. There was obviously some kind of infrastructure to say that these mounds are important for whatever reasons. Social structure within the groups may have been ranked. We don't know any more than that. It's also said as well by some other experts that some of these cities may have been organized slightly differently. And there may have been loose alliances between the great mound building sort of individual states. The most likely scenario is that the amount of control held by leaders within this Mississippian society varied considerably from region to region. So in other words, there might be females dominating the mounds in the south. There might be men dominating the mounds in the north. There might be sort of dictatorial states managing some mounds in various other areas. But the problem is, by the time Westerners got there, by the time the Europeans got there, by the 1500s, by Soto's expedition, by the time they get there, any sense of organization is completely altered or broken down. Whoever these people were, whatever they believed, their sense of connectedness had completely broken down. And again, it's like, in a way, looking at how things developed in regards to Easter Island. Some people say that it was because of Westerners getting to Easter Island. Some people argue that society may have already been collapsing on Easter Island. But usually societies go through changes. And one of the major changes was that by the 1500s, lots of these mounds have been abandoned, and lots of the way they interact with the landscape have been altered, a bit like the people in regards to the Amazon basin. So what I'd like to do is just look at a few more images, and if we sort of go back and try and make sense of this. So again, not just one sense of a platform, but a variety of different platforms. The great sort of this great sort of monk's mound that you can actually see in front of you, sort of terraced. And this is a lot of engineering. So you've got thousands and thousands of tons of alluvium there, and as we discussed, what could be in them, or maybe nothing's in them at all. And seeing as they're revered, and seeing as they're part of an active landscape associated with the Native Americans, it's loath for people to actually excavate these mounds because they're active burial sites. They're sort of, they mean something. It's a bit like going in a modern day cemetery and excavate it. It just wouldn't happen. So this is a thermal image here And the thermal image is actually showing the Great Monk's Mound, which is the image that we've actually just seen. And you've got all these other little pyramids. And in lots of ways, it's something that people look at and they say, actually, you find these great pyramids in various different parts of the world. But various different pyramids have been built in different parts of the world at varying different times in our history. So there's no definite links. And we don't really know, again, why lots of these mounds are being constructed. And again, I've already mentioned what we're looking at with the Cahokia site, but this is rather interesting that you've got this palisade around the outside. Now, this is in Illinois, sort of halfway, sort of going up to Wisconsin, halfway to the Mississippi, and so on, sort of in the heart of what we're looking at. What is this wall about? Is it defensive? It's quite an important wall from the archaeological excavation, and it doesn't actually surround the whole sort of town. It doesn't surround the whole landscape. It doesn't sort of command the landscape. It doesn't protect all the other villages. It only sort of covers a quarter of the landscape. But when we look at this, we sort of look at a pseudo civilization. What I mean by pseudo civilization, what you've got pottery that harks back to the type of pottery that we've got thousands of years before in Britain. But we've got the sense of an advanced connectedness with the landscape. You've got advanced agriculture. You've got trade. You've got the platforms themselves. And then you hark back to sort of totem poles. So we had our totem poles in British society before the Romans. They've got totem poles 1,000 years ago. But is that anything detrimental? And the answer is no. They happen to see totem poles as being very important to their society. And to have all these buildings, to have 20,000 people, must mean that something's working. Again, this is that landscape, Cahokia, and there's these mounds to see today. But again, there's enough surviving to tell us that this was a thriving landscape at one stage. And you see these different reconstructions, and you've got this wall around this sort of mound, and you've got these little plazas, and it's almost trying to work out what's going on, but not being able to work out at all. But they obviously needed these platforms. They needed these communities. They needed the river. They needed trade. They needed to be together. They needed to have 20,000 people together. And this is in one spot. So what was going on at other localities is again equally diverse. And again, it would be good for some of you to go have a little look at this, and to sort of look at the feminine link to try and work out the importance of female burials associated with these sites, and the importance of females in society, which was far greater and far more enhanced than the role that men had in society. And that does have an impact in how you interpret society, i.e. whether it interprets society as being very warlike, or as it interprets society as being very pastoral or sedentary, or looking at another angle. So again, there's lots of perspectives at looking at these mountains, and lots of ways that this is how it is now, this is how it was a few years ago. And again, should we, even if people excavated these mounds, right? So they excavate them. There's active excavations around the plains on some of the lesser buildings. So if we excavated these mounds, right, and somebody said, oh, actually, there's a burial in the middle, or there's actually the remains of a temple, or there's nothing in the middle, right? Or there's something else in the middle, or there's a house in the middle, or whatever, right? That doesn't mean very much, because whatever that building meant and whatever the mound meant above it is two different things. Society always develops in a meaningful but developed way. For example, we've spoken a lot today about the pandemic, and I said before Christmas we're not supposed to be talking about these things, but because it's really not helpful, because it's not getting us anywhere. But what we can do is look at what we're seeing in regards to these images, and we can infer that the mounds and being in groups of people and the Mississippi River and trade is very important to understanding the foundations of North America. And yes, they are excavating near the Great Mound, and they're obviously working to understand the sediment and how these sites evolve, and the different periods of occupation at the site. So remember, this site itself is the Cahokia site, from where it was refounded around 750 years AD, going all the way to about 1450 or thereabout. Yeah, that's an occupation at the site of over 700 years. And so people felt that these sites were important, and the structure worked for 700 years, which is quite important. But when archaeologists are actually excavating these sites, it's really difficult to get an idea of what these buildings look like. So these indicate some of the trenches in regards to the houses that people would have lived in. And the traces of the archaeology are very, very faint. So getting evidence for halves, getting evidence for flints, any of their evidence is another way of getting closer to how these types of sites developed. And again, more of these excavations, excavating the sediment. And again, most of the people excavating these sites are, from Western universities. And for me, the particular importance is how the native peoples actually interpret the sites, because it is their history, it is their archaeology. And that lady working on her own history there, sieving all the archaeology with a great mound in the background, near the great mound, the monk's mound of Cahokia. And I think somebody said that this this type of landscape looks very sort of Aztec-y, looks very not the type of thing that you might associate with this part of North America, and you would be very right in thinking that. And again, we've got a little bit of information about this stockade around this central area. And if you squint your eye and you take around those roundhouses, it look very Aztec-y, but these are earthen mounds, not stone mounds. So the Aztec sites that are being, basically, when we look at the Aztec world, we're talking about the Aztec world by around the 1400s, at the time that this site is starting to be slowly abandoned. You've got the great temples and everything being constructed associated with the Aztec world on the framework of the great temples that already existed in regards to the Mayan world across the landscape of Central America. So the only real parallels is that these people are building buildings that are similar, but are of earth instead of stone. But the functions and the reasons why these are being constructed are very different than the functions and reasons of buildings associated with the Aztec world, 1,500 miles south. And again, working at those sediments, getting the archaeology, getting those sort of precise layers to sort of give us a time print to understand some of the answers to the questions why. I thought this was quite helpful, because it's the golden age of Cahokia, and what you've got these rectangular buildings, as indicated from a little bit of archaeology back then. It's talking about 20,000 people lived at the site. It's talking about wood henges, talking about calendars, it's talking about posts, the red cedar, and it's talking a lot about sort of time and sort of rising suns and all the rest of it. But what is more important to me is the ability, is the sense that they actually did this. They actually were able to do this. And then what is of great interest to me is then people arguing that there was nothing in North America. nothing happened in North America until, you know, people got there in the late 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s. Nothing really was there, right? Nothing occurred, you know. But what we do have is that we've got a very rich history. We've got a very rich archaeology, and I've been loath to say this or articulate this, that when I looked at this on Monday, I made very much along the lines of what would have happened if these cities would have continued to have been built and occupied. What would have welcomed the Spanish? What may have welcomed the Spanish is exactly the same fate as happened to the Inca and the Aztec. This civilization would have been wiped out, but it would have been wiped out a lot sooner, because it would have been a several-pronged attack. It would have been the Spanish coming from the south. From the north, you would have had the English and the Germans and other peoples coming from the north, and it would have been it would have been a further decline into this sort of civilized world. But again, doesn't that reconstruction of that sort of big building in the middle look really impressive? What these buildings are on top, we can only guess. It's a bit like Silbury Hill, we can only guess. So again, that's sort of by 1150s, 1200s, you've got the last building is erected on the summit of Monk's Mound, the largest man-made mound in the Northern American continent. Now, up until this week, I had never heard of Monk's Mound. I've known about the Mississippi mound builders for a very long time. I thought they were all in Mississippi. That's why they're called the Mississippi Mounds, but they're not. They're spread all the way along that delta of the Mississippi, from the south to the north. They're spread all the way along. This is in Illinois. So you're looking at this sort of great, impressive mound, and we are to be shamed for not knowing that this existed or exists. And rather interesting thing here that you've got around that central building, that central mound at Monk's Mound, you've got a 40-acre area that you've got a palisade around the whole thing. You've got a wooden palisade around the whole thing, and it's showing here the development of these towers. There's a wall around it, and these towers, and you're thinking, why? Why? There's a lot of people here. You know, you need a lot to take on 20,000 people, and it's what is this about? Is it about defense? Is it about defense, or is it about status? Because there's lots of these types of sites around, and the great tragedy is that lots of them are being actively destroyed even today. So, you know, there might be new sites out there that are just being lost. And maybe looking at a book, The Archaeology of Power by Thomas Emerson, might give you an idea to understanding the role of women in regards to this society. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call that a day now, and I'm going to see if there are any questions. Let's stop the sharing. And are there any questions? Let's. Do you know what? Let's find. I will be doing the last landscape archaeology class tonight. As I said, Jessica will be taking over next week. So if anyone's interested in that, they need to let me know. Stay behind at the end. Anyone interested in the Zoom walks, let me know as well. But other than that, we'll be doing Glastonbury next week. So what I'm going to do is ask Goff. Goff, I've got to. Goff is one of my intriguing number, because if I had have thought of Goff initially, Goff, just run with me on this one. When Goff started coming to the classes, I actually thought that Goff would be one of those that'd be just interested in local history, and that's it. But Goff intrigues me because Goff is the one who absolutely loves looking at places like North America and loves looking at China, and I think that's great, because it's so easy to get people wrong. And I've got you wrong over the years, Goff, because I just thought you were just interested in the local stuff. But I'm so pleased that I am wrong, because I know you get a lot out of these.
Thank you. Yeah, no questions. That was great. Thank you.
It's a compliment, Goff. Thank you. And
Carl, can I interrupt?
yeah, go for it.
Only because I've got to go. It was a very interesting lecture, but this is nothing to do with it. Ellen phoned me shortly after the break. She's had trouble both last night and today getting into your class. It comes up that that she's waiting and what have you, and that you'll let her in. but then nothing happens after that, and she's tried coming out and going back in again numerous times, but it hasn't worked.
We haven't seen we haven't seen her. It's strange.
Yeah, it's
Mine
odd,
was
isn't
the
it?
same. I had to wait about 8 or 9 minutes before it actually came live and I could be let in.
Okay.
Took me about at least that 10-15 minutes to get in.
Oh, hang on a minute, flipping heck. Yeah, I don't know. I will. The main thing to do, right, is if you are waiting, right, Goff, there's always bullies, isn't there? And they're all ganging up on me. Don't you gang up on me, right? The best thing to do is if you get any problems in future, all you need to do is you need to text me and like I am waiting from Goff, and I will see what I can do.
Okay, but she said she can't do it this evening anyway.
Right.
But I told her that I would tell you.
Right. You
Okay, I've got to go, but thank you. That was very, very good indeed.
It's good to have people like you, Jane. My ego has just exploded, and do you know what? You are the best totty I could ever have.
I'm very pleased to hear it. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers, Jane.
Bye.
So no other news from Chris Manolo. What about Chris Fem?
No, thank you. That was very good.
Right. So we've done Keith. Have we done you, Keith?
No.
Well, go on.
What about that mad stone you mentioned right at the beginning? Have we got any more news of why it was called a mad stone?
Now that is your homework for next week. That would be great. That is your homework for next week.
We also had some problems getting in today.
Yeah, but what do you mean we? There's only you there.
That's it. Dob.
So you're pretty good at this, are you?
I hope you feel better soon. Anyway, okay.
I appreciate that. And what about you, Pamela?
Right. It's very good today, but as always, it leads on to other things, doesn't it? I've watched nearly all of YouTube on Mont St. Michael, and it's built on a mound, and they're doing the dating of that to find the older parts of it, which is part of the original mound. And in the centre, I don't know if I should say this really, there is a stone, but it's because of lava building up. And this is how Mont St. Michael was formed.
Talking about.
Pardon?
This isn't one of these mounds that we've been talking about now, yeah?
No, not in America. This is Mont St. Michael, but it's because you've been talking of mounds.
Ah, right.
And it's relative, and it's very interesting of how it was formed and how they've discovered the age of it and how they've gone down and found older parts of it. So that would be like the mound that you're talking about and buildings built on top of it.
Well, you're gonna have to get us some dates for next week then. Easy, job done.
Dates.
There's nothing wrong. Get us some dates.
So I was mentioning it because it's on YouTube, and it's Mount St. Michael, which is off the French coast.
You don't want to take note of what's on YouTube.
Oh, right then.
Anyway, tell us a bit more next week. And thanks for that, Pam. And
all right then. I was hoping people would watch it, but never mind.
Good. Chuck the link.
It sounds interesting.
Finally, Andrea. So that's St. Michael's Mount you were talking about, yeah?
Yeah. No, Mont St. Michael.
Yeah. On Saint Michel, is it?
In France.
Yeah.
Oh, no, interested in France. Mount St. Michael in France. Look that one up on YouTube.
Not St. Michael's Mount, the other one.
I'll tell you what, give us a bloody link next week. I'll get so confused here. Right. So, Andrea, anything you would like to say from your minions? No?
No, nothing. Very interesting topic. Didn't know anything about it. I'll have to look into it a bit more. See if I can find anything out.
And don't forget to look at Mount St. Michael's in France, and not the Mount St. Michael's, the other Mount St. Michael's in France.
I think I'll stick to looking at the ones in America. Okay.
I think. Well, if nobody wants, if anyone wants to stay around and have a chat about anything at the end, then they can do so. But if not, I really appreciate your support and staying with us this year. Yes, it will get better. And I'm going to say thank you very much to Garth, Keith, Chris, Pam, Chris, and obviously Andrea and Jane, because I don't know what's happened to the other three today, but that's life. Anyway, take care, folks.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
see you. Bye bye,
Thank
Daddy.
you,
Bye bye,
guys.
Daddy.
Bye.
Bye bye, Daddy. Cheers,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you next week.
Bye.
In Andrea's house. Try. Oh, well, that's it. There's only you left, Chris. I'll have to. I don't know about the. I think Andrea might want to have a chat with me. You see.
Hang on.
Do I want to have a chat with you? Do I?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to get this off record. Hang on a minute. One, two, three. So anyway, thanks for watching this today, and we'll sort of put that on. So hopefully you've enjoyed this today. And I'm just going to get this sort of little bit of a video up. Hopefully you can watch this. And yes, this is the result of COVID, and hopefully everything will be okay next week. Anyway, thanks for watching this lecture today, and don't forget to subscribe and like and support or whatever. Thank you very much. Let's end the video. Stop screen sharing, and I'm off. Thank you.